Mysteriously, the government of Egypt is holding hostage 19 Americans. They won't let them leave the country. They're going to try them. One of them is the son of the Transportation Secretary, Ray LaHood. And you say, what's going on? We're going to look behind it to see if it has some deeper meaning. John Jessup now has this look at why Egypt's military rulers are doing this strange thing and how they may respond.
Friday will mark the one-year anniversary when former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak bowed to political pressure and stepped down. But critics say Mubarak's repressive regime is alive and well, perpetuated by the ruling Egyptian military. It's still engaged in regular and frequent clashes with civilians, and now it's taken the fight global to the United States. 19 Americans working to promote democracy and human rights now face trial in criminal court. Among them, the son of Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. The charges? That the non-governmental organization workers are behind the anti-government protests, part of a conspiracy to create unrest. Charges the U.S. denies.
We do not believe there is any basis for these investigations, these raids on the sites that the NGOs operate out of, the seizure of their equipment.
The real reason, according to an Arabic human rights group, is to exact revenge on organizations that report on military abuses since it took control.
If you compare between the human rights situation before the revolution and after the revolution, you will find that the violation increased.
But the fallout has major financial consequences for a nation that has been the U.S.'s strongest Arab ally for decades. More than 40 House lawmakers signed a bipartisan letter to the Pentagon and State Department, calling the raids and investigations an attack on Egyptian civil society writ large, and put the Egyptians on notice that they could lose more than $1 billion in annual military aid and $250 million in economic aid. This issue, they wrote, will make it increasingly difficult for congressional supporters of a strong U.S.-Egypt bilateral relationship to defend current levels of assistance to Egypt, especially in this climate of budget cuts. And the feelings are the same in the Senate as well. Independent Joe Lieberman called them ridiculous, trumped-up charges. Democrat John Kerry described the incident as a slap in the face to Americans who have supported Egypt for decades. And Republican Senator John McCain said, as a result, we should examine every aspect of Americans' relationship with Egypt. John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
I want to ask you, and I've been asking our news department, I'm trying to ask myself, what is the game these people are playing? They're going to throw away $1 billion plus, $1.3 billion actually, in U.S. aid in order to bring charges against these people, trumped-up charges. Well, our CBN News terrorism analyst, Erick Stakelbeck, is with us now from Washington. Eric, what's the game plan? Have you got anything behind this action?
You know, Pat, on its surface, it looks crazy. As you said, $1.3 billion a year in military aid to this Egyptian regime. Pat, I think there's a few possibilities here. Number one, the Egyptian regime is taking a calculated risk. The Egyptian economy is in shambles right now. The tourism industry has collapsed over the past year. The average Egyptian lives on under $2 a day. So we might see this regime right now making a calculated risk to put us on the spot, the U.S., and really glean even more concessions from us, even more aid from us. It might be a calculated risk here. They already have us over a barrel, Pat. This is literally blackmail. Basically, this Egyptian regime is blackmailing us. We give them billions of dollars of aid so they'll keep the peace treaty with Israel and keep Islamists at bay. Well, you know what? Both of those things are out the window right now. The Islamists are in power, and they're saying the peace treaty with Israel is going to be out the window very soon. And that brings me to the other option here, Pat. The Islamists in Egypt. Now, 75% right now of the Egyptian parliament is controlled by radical Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and groups even more radical than the Brotherhood. And Egyptian sources have told me that the Brotherhood and the Egyptian military regime, which were at odds for decades, have come to a sort of unspoken agreement, a backdoor deal, if you will, a power-sharing agreement. And what you might be seeing right now is these Islamists really stepping up their influence. They don't want any U.S. presence, especially aid workers, democracy activists, any U.S. presence at all in that country do the Islamists. And, Pat, the big loser here, I think, with this new Egyptian regime that no one's really talking about are the Christians in Egypt.
Well, Eric, the U.S. is going to have to cut that aid off. They just can't do it. Either these guys, let up and let these 19 people go, or else we cannot continue to give them money. We can't do it.
Pat, you would think so. And really, if this drags on, think about it. This could shape up almost as a modern-day Iranian hostage crisis. We have 19 Americans, including the son of a member of the U.S. administration, literally held hostage in Egypt. They're talking about a show trial, parading these Americans in front of the cameras. You can't see aid continuing under those circumstances. But if you look historically, Pat, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, we said the same things, right? Pakistan supporting jihad. We still give them billions in aid. Saudi Arabia, 15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. We're still giving them billions in aid as well. In Saudi, we need their oil. Pakistan has nukes, and they're supposedly helping us in the war on terror. Well, with Egypt, the thinking goes that they will keep the peace treaty with Israel. But all of these things, obviously, are in shambles right now, Pat. So you don't see how we could continue aid. But we've done some pretty foolish things in the past, especially in the Middle East.
Could this trigger a really major explosion? I mean, they seem to, the Muslim Brotherhood wants to break the treaty with Israel. Could this launch some kind of a jihad against Israel?
Yeah, Pat, I mean, this is one of the many trigger points that we're seeing. Let's be clear. Let's lay it all out for viewers. War is coming in the Middle East very soon, whether it's this year, whether it's next year. And one of the big questions, Pat, is what does Egypt do on Israel's southern border? Does Egypt open the floodgates in Sinai, let jihadists flow in there and attack Israel? Does Egypt assist Hamas in Gaza? That is one of the biggest questions right now, because these radical Islamists, these guys mean business. The Muslim Brotherhood and the related jihadist groups that are now controlling the Egyptian parliament, calling the shots along with this obviously radical military. They don't play around, and they are inherently hostile to Israel, but not only Israel, America. What do they do when hostilities break out? Because, Pat, you and I both know they're coming.
Thank you, Eric. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted you to hear that because it's a hot spot. You'll be hearing more and more about it in the news. But in addition to that, we're going to be talking, I believe, tomorrow about the possibility of an Israeli strike on Iranian facilities. Well, you've got this thing seething in their southern border when they're faced with something to the east in Iran. I mean, we're looking at a cauldron over there, and this is part of it. Lee Webb has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Lee?
Pat, Rick Santorum won a clean sweep of the votes in 3 states Tuesday, and he's now in second place in the delegate count. Santorum won the votes in Missouri, Minnesota, and Colorado, and he looked beyond the battle for the Republican nomination to the general election.
I don't stand here to claim to be the conservative alternative to Mitt Romney. I stand here to be the conservative alternative to Barack Obama.
Romney congratulated Santorum on his win, but said he still expects to be the nominee. What do you make of this clean sweep in the Midwest, Pat?
Well, I think it's remarkable. I think Rick Santorum, what it's done is edge Newt Gingrich to the sidelines. He says, I am the conservative alternative. He's no such thing. Santorum now has won 4 of these contests. Now, remember, they're kind of like non-binding things. What happened in Missouri had no consequence. What happened in Minnesota, the amazing thing, Pawlenty, the former governor, is working for Romney, but he couldn't bring Minnesota in line for Romney. But again, it's a small group, and it's dominated pretty much by Christians, those caucuses. Colorado is a different story. Colorado was won by Romney, but he was the alternative to McCain, so he ran as a conservative. But nevertheless, this puts Newt Gingrich not as number 2 and now as number 3. And I don't see the vitriol going between Santorum and Romney. So when it's all said and done, this is a super plus for Mitt Romney, despite what you might read in the press that somehow he lost. He didn't lose anything. He won an appropriate opponent and downgraded the one who was giving him trouble. Lee?
The issue of same-sex marriage may be on its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Ninth Circuit Court struck down California's Proposition 8. That's the state's ban on gay marriage. Voters passed it in 2008. A three-judge panel ruled it violates, though, the civil rights of homosexuals. Andy Puno wrote Prop 8 and defended it in federal court.
A win for us would be a Supreme Court decision saying this is not something that judges should decide. This is something that the people and their elected representatives should decide on a state-by-state basis.
I think the Supreme Court will say this is an issue. We don't want to have a decision that basically threatens all the rest of the marriage laws, the other 44 states in the entire country, as their definition of marriage as one man and one woman.
That is Jordan Lawrence, and he told me yesterday that he believes it will head to the Supreme Court. The Ninth Circuit is one of the most liberal in the U.S. It also has the most overturned decisions. Pat?
Well, you know, they've got three judges did this, but there's a whole group of judges on the Ninth Circuit, and so they could ask for a hearing. It's what they call en banc, so all of them could make a decision. And then if they uphold this proposition, well, all's well and good, but if they don't, then they could get an appeal to the Supreme Court. But I think it's got to go there. Lee?
Pat, a top executive with the Susan G. Komen for the Cure Foundation has resigned. Karen Handel was Komen's vice president for public policy. She was involved in the group's original decision to pull funding from Planned Parenthood, but she claims it was a move Komen executives had been discussing long before she got there. Handel told Fox News she disagreed with the group's decision to backtrack.
It's clear that there is enormous pressure on the organization, enormous pressure. And, you know, while I disagree, I respect the organization's right to make that decision and move forward.
In 2010, Karen Handel was a Republican candidate for governor in Georgia. She won the endorsement in that race of Sarah Palin, but Nathan Deal won the general election. Bread beats out potato chips as the #1 source of salt in the American diet. A new government report says there's actually twice as much salt in bread and rolls as there is in salty junk food like chips or pretzels. The Centers for Disease Control found that 10 foods are responsible for 44% of the sodium we take in. Also on the list, cold cuts, fast food hamburgers, spaghetti, and pizza, to name a few. Salt is the main source of sodium, which increases the risk of high blood pressure. Dietary guidelines recommend only a teaspoon of salt a day. Pat?
Thank you, sir. May I ask you, when you're picking out bread for your little family, do you read the label?
Always.
You do read the label?
Yeah, I go either a Whole Foods store or I go to, I love Trader Joe's, and I, get the all-natural kind of bread with the basic ingredients.
But you read the amount of sodium.
Yeah. Have you ever looked at the label on bread?
Yes.
And literally the ingredients are this long. You're like, it's bread. All you need is like water, flour, sugar.
But you got to read the sodium content because depending on what you're looking at, I mean, it's a huge difference. And man, you look at some of the, the soul food. You look at the barbecue sauce, 860 milligrams of salt per teaspoonful. I mean, it's unbelievable how much salt is in those things.
It's crazy, but the one positive thing I'm thinking, does this mean that maybe I could have potato chips now?
Oh, absolutely. You can just have all you want.
Okay, I make potato chip sandwiches.
Make your own potato chips. But, get one of those things that slice the potatoes real thin, put them in, and bake them.
Yeah, it's too easy to go to the grocery store. Good idea, though.
Okay. A group of lawmakers is fighting the Air Force's decision to remove a reference to God from a logo. That logo of the Rapid Capabilities Office contained a Latin quote that translates, "doing God's work with other people's money." Well, an atheist group complained about that, so the phrase was rewritten to read, "doing miracles with other people's money." Now, Virginia Congressman Randy Forbes is leading a group of 35 lawmakers from both parties asking the Air Force to reverse its decision. Rescue teams are losing hope of finding any survivors in the landslides triggered by Monday's powerful earthquake in the Philippines. They've recovered 26 bodies. 71 people are still missing. The country's president flew to the disaster area Monday and ordered workers to speed up the rebuilding of roads and bridges that, as you can see here, collapsed. The bridges were not built to survive a 6.9 quake. Seismologists say they were not aware of the undersea fault line that caused that earthquake. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.